Hello everybody, it's Kara from Old Book Garden, and today I'm here with part 1 of my December wrap-up. Content warnings will be in the description box, as well as links to all of the people and videos and everything that I mention, as well as some general overview of things that are happening right now, and let's just get into it. The first book I finished in December was a reread, and that was Wildwood Dancing by Juliet Merlier. This was a buddy read with my friend Huck from Badger Reads. This was a reread for both of us, and it was one that we had both really enjoyed before, and I did still really like this again. This is a 12 Dancing Princesses retelling, and we're following our main character Jaina, and this is set in, I think, Romania, I forget what century it is, but it's like a few hundred years ago, so it's kind of a historical fantasy setting. And at the beginning of the book, her father goes off on a trade expedition because he's a trader, and he's going to be gone for quite a long time. And so Jaina is kind of left in charge of her family because she has, even though she's the second oldest and not the oldest, she's kind of handled a lot of the finances, and she's been kind of training with her father a lot. And also for a long time now, her and her sisters have every full moon have been able to cross into the fairy world or the other world and take part in the dances there and the revels and everything. So that is also ongoing. And then once her father leaves, it's not very long before her cousin kind of starts trying to take over, or not kind of, he does try to take over, say that he should be in charge and all of this. So there's a lot of conflict going on with that. And then also her older sister Tati, she gets involved in some this romantic thing that could mean a lot of trouble and danger. And yeah, like I said, I did really enjoy this again. I really like Jaina as a main character. I really like the writing. I think Juliet Merlier does a great job with atmosphere, and I feel like she's not overly flowery. She does a great job of describing the setting and setting the tone and the atmosphere without getting too bogged down in details, which I appreciated. I really liked Gogu, who is a frog companion that Jaina has that she talks to, and he can kind of talk back to her as well. I really liked him. He was probably one of my favorite characters, and I liked the magical aspects as well. I did there were a couple of things though about this book that bothered me a lot more than the first time I read it, because I remember I read this a few years ago now, and the things that I didn't like then either, but they stood out to me a lot more this time for some reason. And one of those is plot related, and that is her cousin Chazar is the absolute worst. I despise him with a fiery passion, and you are supposed to. So I think he's a well-written antagonist because he's also very normal. There are people out there today who still act and think and talk like him, and it was infuriating, but that was that made sense for the story. The things that did really bother me are I hated Tati's whole storyline. It made me so angry the way that she handled things and the way that other characters handled things, and yeah, I really hate everything about that, and it didn't have to be that way. And then also related to the sister dynamics is I was just disappointed that there wasn't more of that bond between sisters. That was something that I thought I remembered from this book, is getting to see Jaina and her sisters really work together, and you get a couple of moments like that, but not really. Huck and I talked about this while we were buddy reading it, that it kind of seems like her sisters are just there to cause obstacles for her, in the story. It didn't feel like we got a lot of that solidarity, which was disappointing. And there were just a few other kind of little plot things that I think that frustrated me, that I think didn't have to be written the way that they were. But overall, I did really enjoy this. I did give Wildwood Dancing 4 stars, and even though it's not a favorite like it was the first time, it is still one I really enjoy and would definitely recommend. Next, I finished Subversive by Colleen Cowley. This is the first book in the Clandestine Magic trilogy, and this is it's an alternate history contemporary fantasy, but it reads more like a historical fantasy or a dystopian even. I guess you could call it a dystopian. And the reason I say all of that is because it is, I think, set in modern day, but it's set in a world where magic is real and men are believed to be the only ones who can use magic and train with it. And because of this, it has really set back the women's liberation movement. So this book is set in modern day, but women do not yet have the vote. This is set in this alternate history United States. I don't remember what they say about other countries, if it's similar, but so that's kind of where we start the setting for this book. And we follow 2 main characters. One of them is a young woman named Beatrix Harper, who is involved with the women's suffrage movement, and also with in this world, the suffrage movement is very linked to the women should be able to learn magic and should be able to be tested for magic, that kind of thing. So she's very involved with that, especially her sister is, and she's kind of been like, she's like a support for her sister doing that, but her sister is like the glamorous kind of face of the movement in a lot of ways. And then the other main character we're following is named Peter Blackwell, and he is a wizard, and he actually is from the town that Beatrix lives in. Like, this is his hometown too, but he hasn't been back for years and years and years, and then he finally shows up again as kind of like their town wizard, and that's kind of weird for everybody because he was like a big shot. Like, people who are as good at magic as he is, they don't really come back and do these like small town kind of magics, like that kind of thing. So people don't really know what's going on, but he's there to like take care of the town's problems and everything. And he ends up kind of like convincing / pressuring Beatrix into being his assistant and helping him. And he doesn't tell her immediately what he actually needs her for, but they end up having to work very closely. And of course Beatrix isn't happy about that because wizards are like very much against what her and her sister want to do. So there's a lot of like personal conflict. There's also some like magical conflict that makes it very complicated. There are secrets about Peter's past that come to light, about why he's here and what he did before. And yeah, this was like a really, really good book. I really enjoyed this, and it was also incredibly gripping. Like, this is it almost 500 pages? It's like 430, and I like flew through it in like one night because I was just so invested in these characters and the story. So I obviously really enjoyed it. I really liked our main characters. Like, I really liked Beatrix. I really admired her, and I just liked how committed she was to her goals and to doing the right thing. And I also liked Peter, although like he's such an interesting character because from the synopsis and from other reviews I had seen, you get the feeling like, oh, like Peter has like a dark past that you don't know. And I'm like, oh, okay, fine. Like, I got it. And I did not get it because I think Colleen Cowley goes a lot farther than authors often do with the backstory of characters we're supposed to like. And I actually admire her for that. Like, I think she did a really good job of like creating a history for Peter that is like, that is wrong. He did horrible things, and he even does some horrible things in the course of this book, but you still kind of care about what happens to him because you see that he's also capable of good, and not just capable of good, but that like he is actively pursuing things that are good. And he was a very interesting character. I think he's one that's gonna be, like, different readers are gonna have very different reactions to him. I guess I'm kind of in the middle where like I like him, but I also have some big issues with him, and I kind of feel guilty for liking him as much as I do. So I just thought he was really interesting, and I really liked Peter and Beatrix's like dynamic and their conflict with each other. Like, it was really well written. I could definitely understand why they would not get along for a really long time, but they also had this really interesting like pull to each other, and they like balance each other in really fantastic ways. So their relationship is like very complicated and messy, but I just really liked watching them interact. I think what the author does really well when it comes to like Peter as a character and how you feel about what he's doing in the book and how he's interacting with Beatrix, I think she does a good job of like why he believes his goal is important enough that he can do these other things that are not okay, while also showing you from Beatrix's perspective that like, no, of course you can't do that. What's wrong with you? Like, I think you can kind of see both of those things simultaneously. I also thought the genre blend and the setting of this one was really, really interesting. This is not a genre mix I maybe would have gravitated towards normally, but I think it was handled really well here. One thing I really love is the way that the social issues are blended or like enhanced by the magic. Because I think I've said this before, I tend to be very particular about fantasy books that take real world issues and kind of make you think like, oh, but the real problem was magical, was not like regular people being horrible or doing horrible things. That's one of my big problems with the Captain America movie, and that's something I just tend to be very picky about in stories. I think the reason it worked here for me is because, like, rather than replacing, for example, like replacing women's suffrage with women should be able to use magic, it was like those things were tied together, and like Beatrix was like pursuing the magical aspect as an extension of women's rights, if that makes sense. I don't know if that distinction does make sense, but it felt different in this book, and I really liked how it was done. As far as things I didn't like, there were a couple of plot aspects that I found a little frustrating. And kind of like I was saying with Wildwood Dancing, it was like frustrating in a way that I don't think it had to be for the story, which is what tends to annoy me. But the bigger issue I had was actually related to Peter's backstory, because I think we needed, like, considering what we find out and then how he is in the present, I think we needed a little more, I don't know, almost like explanation for how he transitioned between his ideas and goals, if that makes sense. Like, I don't know, I didn't necessarily want more detail of what he did, because that part was really rough to read, but it just felt like the fact that he would do some of these things was surprising considering what we know about him now, but then it was also surprising that, like, he went from that to suddenly being not okay with what was happening, and we didn't really see that part, we just heard about it after. So I don't feel like I'm articulating that issue very well, but, like, basically there were things about Peter's backstory that I think could have been explained more or made a little more consistent, even though, like, overall I think the complexity of his character was handled well. There was just that one piece that I think maybe wasn't. But overall I really enjoyed this, and I gave Subversive 4 stars. Next I finished another reread, and that was Nutcracker by E.T.A. Hoffman, pictures by Maurice Sendak. I have read this a few times before and I reread it again. I do really like this adaptation. I really like the whimsicalness of the writing. Oh, and it's also translated by Ralph Manheim. So as far as I know, this is like the original text of the Nutcracker story, which I think was actually done after the ballet. It's very confusing. But I think the text of this one could be considered the original edition of the, like, literature piece. But I really like the whimsicalness of it, and the humor too. That's something that was really fun. I like this story. I think it's interesting. The pictures are great, as expected. I actually like this a lot more than Maurice Sendak's, like, famous, you know, Where the Wild Things Are. I like this one a lot more. And I don't really have, like, a lot else to say about it. I think a lot of people know the story of the Nutcracker, but it's about this young girl, Clara, or I think in this version she's named Marie. Yeah, they changed her name, I think, for the ballet. She gets a Nutcracker doll, and it's about, like, the adventures, and we also get a lot of the backstory of the Nutcracker and, like, the magical world that he's from, and it's just, like, a really fun story. There are definitely parts of the plot that are less interesting than others, and there are definitely parts of the writing and the setting that don't age as well. Like, there's definitely some, like, Orientalism in here as well, so just be aware of that. But I do, like, enjoy this overall as a story, and I gave this 4 stars. Next I finished Olivia by Dorothy Strachey. This was our Pasta Classics pick for the month of... Every time, you guys, every time. I think it was November, but we had the live show in December. I don't remember, but I will link that live show down below, which was on Julia's channel. And yeah, this is a very, very short story. I think it's like a novella. My edition is like barely over 100 pages. And this is a classic story following our main character, Olivia, who when she turns 16 is sent to this really prestigious, like, finishing school kind of, or boarding school in Paris, I believe. And it's about her kind of awakening to first love, which is when she gets a crush on one of her teachers, who's also, like, one of the headmistresses of the school. So it's a book that focuses a lot on, like, art and first love and relationships and that kind of thing. And I was not a big fan of this one, unfortunately. I do think it's really cool that we got to read a classic that is actually by a queer woman. I really like that aspect, and I do think that some of the themes about art and beauty and love, I really loved that. There's definitely some great quotes in here. I did like the writing. It's something where if this were a longer book, I think I would have gotten really sick of the descriptive writing style, but in a very small dose, I liked it a lot. But a lot of other things about this, unfortunately, just really didn't work for me. I found the characters extremely flat, including the main character, which is weird and also unfortunate given how internal a lot of this story is. Like, we're in Olivia's head the whole time, and, like, we get lots and lots of internal monologue from her and, like, reflection from her, but I don't feel like it really translates to me knowing her or being attached to her as a character. So that was unfortunate, and I just feel like the characters in general were very flat. Like, I just wasn't very invested. It was definitely an easy and a quick read, which I appreciated, but I did not enjoy it really. And then definitely my biggest problem with this book was the way that it romanticized pedophilia, in my opinion. I really didn't like that. And I knew the premise of the book going in, but there are ways that I think it could have handled this relationship or this crush, you know, in a way that did not kind of glamorize it or glamorize relationships between, like, children and adults. Specifically in this case, like, an authority figure at her school. Like, I think there are ways that the story could have done that in a way that, like, wasn't just, like, really gross, honestly, and unfortunately it did not go that route. So I really didn't like that. And then also when I got to the end, it was just a letdown. Like, it was one of those cases where if I had been more invested in the characters, I would have been a lot more upset. But as it was, I was just kind of like, oh, that's it? Like, what was the point of this whole story? This really felt more of a writing exercise to me than anything else. I gave it 3 stars, which is maybe a little generous, but like I said, it was short enough that I think I didn't have time to get as irritated by all of the things I disliked, like the writing and everything, or that I would have disliked. Like, I didn't have as much time to get sick of that kind of thing, and like the flat characters and all of that, as I would if the story were longer. Although again, definitely my biggest issue was like the stance it seemed to take on this relationship. So yeah, 3 stars. I'm glad I read it, but it's not one of my favorite things that we've read for the club. Next, I finished The Werewolf of Whitechapel by Susannah Roundtree. This is the first book in the Miss Sharp's Monsters series. I think it's a trilogy. We're following our main character Liz, who, as you can possibly see from the cover, she's been scarred by a werewolf. This is like a historical fantasy set in, I think, the 1800s. I don't remember which year or even decade specifically, but it's set in England, and in this fantasy version of the world, every royal house in Europe except for England is made up of like magical creatures or monsters. So there's like werewolves, there's sirens, there's vampires, there might be a few other creatures as well, except for England. They take pride in the fact that they don't have monsters in their royal line. And our main character Liz, she is one of many women who has been attacked and marked by one of these monsters, and that's always very obvious because those wounds don't ever heal, and so they mark these women out as being like loose women, basically, because it's believed that the only reason this could happen is if they had like sold their blood to somebody, which is something that sometimes people do. So it's used as a way to like write off these women as being like unworthy of attention or anything, or unworthy of help, basically, because at the beginning of the book, like the very beginning, one of Liz's best friends, who is also at this like reform school with her, which is like kind of set up to be this like this like rehabilitation house for like fallen women, but it's really more about training these women to be bodyguards, which is very cool. And right at the beginning of the book, one of Liz's best friends is murdered, and because her best friend was also attacked, like was marked in this way by a monster, her death is not considered anything to worry about. Like, nobody's investigating it, nobody really seems to care, and Liz wants to get to the bottom of this and to figure out what happened. She has also just been hired as a bodyguard to Princess May. Like, she's like a lower nobility, but she has just been like, her mother is hoping that she will be engaged to the Prince of England. Liz also ends up meeting an inspector who she wants to help her figure out like what happened with her best friend and everything. And yeah, I really, really enjoyed this. I feel like this is a great example of a book that can be really fun and really thoughtful at the same time, because there's a lot of humor. It's just like a really interesting and fun premise, but I think there's also a lot of really great commentary on the way that like on the symbolism of monstrousness and like magical monsters versus human monsters, and then also on like the ways that like the excuses that people come up with to write off violence against women. And it's interesting because as I was reading this, it reminded me a little bit of like the way that Jack the Ripper's victims were like, oh, they're prostitutes, who cares if they got murdered, like that's what you expect. Like the way that was used to dismiss them as being like unworthy of investigation, whether or not they were actually prostitutes. It was wrong either way. And then it's interesting because at the back of the book, in an author's note, the author actually talks about how she was inspired by, like loosely inspired by that. So this isn't like a Jack the Ripper retelling by any means, but it uses that as like a jumping off point to talk about the way that we excuse women's murders and like violence against women. And I just thought that was so thoughtful and like really well done. So yeah, just like this is a fun book, but it's also a really thoughtful one, which I always like. I did like our main character Liz, even though she is a very she's a very like impetuous character, which I often have a harder time connecting with, just because that is not who I am at all. But I got why she was making her impulsive decisions, so I think that helped. I really liked the supporting characters as well. I think Princess May is a really, really interesting character because she does do, like, she is somebody who's willing to use her position to do good, but she's not perfect. Like, some of the things that she says or the way that she relates to, like, the lower classes and everything is definitely not perfect. So it's interesting to see Liz's viewpoint on that. And then speaking of which, I also think that Susannah Roundtree did a pretty good job of balancing, like, the time period, even though, again, this is fantastical, so it doesn't have to adhere directly to that, but like balancing the time period with like more modern ideas about things. I think she did a good job with that. And yeah, I just really enjoyed this. I'm very excited to continue the series, and I gave The Werewolf of Whitechapel 4.5 stars. Next, I finished a picture book, and that is Extra Yarn by Mac Barnett, illustrated by John Classen. The reason I got this is because I was ordering some things from Barnes & Noble, and they had a sale where like if you bought any like children's or middle grade book, which I had in my cart, you could add this book for, I forget how much it was like half off or something. And I was like, I like yarn. I like knitting. This looks cute. So I did it. But I'm glad I did because I really enjoyed this. This is a picture book about this young girl who, I think she like finds a box that has some yarn in it. And so she makes herself a hat, and she has some yarn left over. So she starts making things for other people. And that's really all I want to say, but this was really lovely. I love the message. I really like the illustrations and like how a lot of it is very dark, but then there's like the brightness of the yarn. Yeah, this is a very like cozy and like heartwarming kind of story. I do think the conflict near the end was a little odd. Like it felt a little abrupt to me, but overall I would definitely still recommend this one, and I gave Extra Yarn 4 stars. Next, I finished A Holiday by Gaslight, a Victorian Christmas novella by Mimi Matthews, and this is a romance. Again, it's a novella, as you heard in the title, and we are following 2 people who had an agreement. They were engaged, I think. I think they were officially engaged, maybe, or almost engaged. I don't remember. But the female main character is named Sophie Apperset, and she is engaged to Edward Sharp. And Sophie is from a like upper class family that has fallen on hard times. Her father has used a lot of their money to like update their house, so like he's put in like gas lamps and all of this, and like he's done all these things that they can't really pay for. So she's of high birth, but she doesn't have a lot of money. And then Edward Sharp is in trade, so he's like lower class, but he's very wealthy. And so the families have decided to do this as a way to kind of solve both of their problems. And they've been like engaged or almost engaged for I think several months at this point, and it doesn't really feel like it's working. Like Sophie feels like she had agreed to this because she thought there was at least a possibility that they could get to know and like each other. Like she was willing to go through with this for the sake of her family, and because she thought that it was possible that her and Edward could come to like each other and possibly even love each other. But it just doesn't seem like he is interested in getting to know her at all. She doesn't feel like she knows him. She just feels like it's not working out, so she kind of like breaks it off with him, but they end up kind of compromising where they have like one more chance to make this work, basically, which is that he will come to stay with their family for like the Christmas holidays, and while they are together there, they're gonna give it one last shot and see if maybe they could end up liking or loving each other. And this is one that I have heard really good things about, and I did really enjoy it. One thing that threw me off was I was surprised that we know from like the very beginning of the story that Edward already likes Sophie. Like I thought it was going to be about the 2 of them growing to love the other person, but it's really more like Edward trying to win Sophie over, which I tend not to like as much. But once I had like readjusted my expectations, I did end up really enjoying this and really enjoying their romance. I also think there was some interesting discussion of like modernization and like progress. And I did like our main characters, and I like them like separately and together. I think they had some really great scenes together. So yeah, I did really enjoy this one, and I gave A Holiday by Gaslight 4 stars. And then finally, the last book I'm going to talk about today is Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Sue Lynn Tan. This is coming out in early 2022, so this was a review of an arc. And this is a fantasy novel. I believe it's the first in a duology it's like inspired by the story of Chang'e, or Chang'u. I'm sorry if I'm not saying that correctly. We're following our main character Qing Yan, who at the beginning of this story, something happens where she has to get sent away from her mother, who lives on the moon. Like she has this beautiful palace. Basically, people in the royal court find out that her mother has been hiding her because nobody knew that she had a daughter. And this is like really dangerous for all of them. And so Qing Yan ends up having to flee. She ends up at the royal palace, and she ends up kind of in this competition where she's trying to get the opportunity to study with the crown prince. And this whole time she's like trying to figure out a way that she can get back to her mother and help her mother. And she starts realizing that maybe one way to do that is if she wins enough favor with the royal family. And then there ends up being some plot stuff around like conflict between different like kingdoms and groups, and like these past wars that happened, and like politics and all of this. And I was sadly really disappointed in this one. This was originally one of my most anticipated releases for 2022, and I just thought this was very like middle of the road for me. I do think that if you are a bigger fan of descriptive writing than I am, you might enjoy this more. And it wasn't that the writing was bad, it just like, you know how when you get to a new location in a book, an author will like set the stage, you know, they'll describe like maybe the room, maybe some of the, like if there's a banquet table, some of the dishes on it, maybe what some of the people are wearing, and like that's all fine. But what this, I feel like what this author kept doing is like she would describe like 4 of everything when she didn't need to, and it just felt like I was wading through a lot of descriptions of things. So even though I liked the setting, it just was kind of a slog after a while, not that long of a while. And I think something that kind of made it feel even more like that was that this book felt pretty long. It's 500 pages, and I really don't think it had to be. So it just felt like it was dragging on. And then probably my biggest issue with this book was the complete disconnect I felt from any of the characters. Like I wanted Qingyan to succeed, and I did really admire her dedication to her mother and her determination to help her. But outside of that, I don't feel like we really got to know her very well, and I feel like a lot of the other characters we didn't get to know very well either. There is kind of a couple of possible romance situations, and I liked some of that for a while, but by the end of the book, I didn't really care about either of them, and there was actually like a point where like I just feel like we were meant to be sold on her and this one character's like unending love for each other after very little build-up. So even though I liked some of their early scenes together, it just felt like that was very like abrupt. Like I don't feel like that was very well developed. And again, I was just very bored throughout this book, and I think that like all of these things kind of influenced each other. Like I was already, you know, dragging my feet with the writing style. The book was too long. Like the plot itself wasn't super interesting to me. And then kind of I think the biggest issue is that I didn't really care about any of these characters. Like I said, I did enjoy the setting. I really liked the idea and like the premise of this book. And I think it's one that a lot of people have been really enjoying. So definitely don't take my review as like the final opinion or anything. I just ended up pretty disappointed in this one, and I gave Daughter of the Moon Goddess 3 stars. Okay, well, we kind of ended on a disappointing note there, but in my next wrap up, I'm gonna have like 3 5-stars in a row, so you have that to look forward to. But those are all of the books I'm going to talk about today. Please comment down below and let me know if you have read any of these, what you thought of them, or if you're going to pick them up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!